This is Hunt Nebraska, the official podcast for insight into Nebraska's hunting and shooting sports community. Be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, our space for sharing stories, information, tips, and techniques. Now, Hunt Nebraska. Big welcome into the Hunt Nebraska cabin here. As you can tell, if you're watching us on YouTube, there's just a couple of us in the cabin today. We got Michael Addison, currently with the National Wild Turkey Federation.
For a little longer.
And then you got me, Hershy. But we wanted to get a podcast out this week while others are running about the state and beyond. We've got a couple regulars.
Yep.
Kyle and Jeff, both at the International Hunter Education Association conference. There you go.
We got it this time.
The coordinators of several different states and some provinces are probably attending there, and we might have to do a podcast on that to see if there's anything noteworthy that
I bet
discussed.
There is. Yeah, there's some cool stuff that IHA has been working on.
There is some neat stuff that we'll be talking about here in Nebraska and beyond. And next week we were originally both of us scheduled to be at the 4-H National Shooting Sports competition in Grand Island, Nebraska, both on the shotgun range. We've got some other folks. Rachel is going to be on one of the other discipline ranges. Kayla from Pheasants Forever is going to be on one of the air rifle ranges, I believe. So quite a few of us involved with that. But we got kind of a unique conversation started here, folks. And I think this is actually going to be one that we morph into something bigger if I can figure this all out. Because we got talking. You were talking this morning out there by the offices about something going on in Australia when it comes to hunting.
I was reading an Outdoor Life article about Australian duck hunting.
Australian duck hunting. It's
pretty controversial, apparently.
Duck hunting down under. And it was one of those things that led into something that I find very fascinating is kind of what the American experience is. And when it comes to hunting, I think that for the most part, especially here on the Great Plains and Upper Midwest, it's different.
Yep.
We don't realize how fortunate we are, as well as how different the rest of the world can be when it comes to hunting. We hear a few things, right?
Yeah.
We hear about big game in Africa and perhaps driven pheasants in Great Britain or parts of Europe. But to become a hunter isn't something that just, okay, I got to take a course. Okay, I got to be a certain age for certain permits. Okay, I got to apply if it's a limited draw for mule deer here or elk in Nebraska or anything like that. There's a whole bunch of different ways of thinking about it.
There's a lot of some places, depending on where you're hunting, there's a lot of different hoops to jump through.
There is. So the conversation kind of jogged a memory I had of an individual at a Hunter Ed rendezvous with a bunch of Hunter Ed coordinators and volunteer instructors about what it took to become a hunter in Germany, for example, and what endeavor it was. So maybe this is going to lead into something bigger, looking at different countries, different parts of the world, and what it means to be a hunter and how hunting is viewed and the process of actually being able to go out and hunt. And Australia is, unique.
Yeah.
In many respects, and I think we're going to hear that play out as we go. So first of all, disclaimers, all right? Neither one of us are Australian. Well, I'm not. I can't speak for you.
I'm not Australian.
So we're not the utmost authorities on anything we speak about in Australia hunting terms and what it takes to become a hunter, or the topic that we're going to get into, duck hunting, the down under. But these are kind of our thoughts, our ideas, things we've pulled off of places online where you can find a whole bunch of information on this different things. So we might actually have to track down an Australian hunter or someone that's actually been over to that country or area to hunt and get some of their thoughts. We do. Our former waterfowl program manager, Matt Garrick, was from New Zealand.
And that's a place I want to go to and hunt someday, because turkeys are considered a pest species over there. They're a nuisance. They're not a game bird. So you can hunt turkeys with whatever, however much, whenever you want to.
See, and that's one of those things that just kind of makes you scratch your head.
Yeah.
Australia, very similar, right? I mean, that's an area known for, quite specific types of critters.
Yep.
When it comes to mammals, marsupials,
maybe the occasional. I think they've got, of course, down there they call deer stag.
Yeah.
So I think they've got some of those, maybe more on New Zealand than Australia.
And I think a lot of the game animals that get hunted down there in Australia, and I'm going to say down there because down under.
Yep.
I apologize for that early, folks. A lot of introduced species. In fact, a lot of the game things that we hunt here and in Europe and especially Great Britain, the game critters were introduced over there and kind of became a nuisance in a lot of respects.
Yep.
The rabbit keeps popping up
as
something that is a great nuisance across that entire country.
Yep.
So
I mean, we brought them in, and rabbits did rabbit things. And, and here we are.
So a lot of different exotic species. In fact, different types of deer. I saw a list of all the different types of deer that reside now within the country, and I guess you could say the continent that is Australia, but most of those were introduced as well. So one of the things I kind of want to frame this, because I don't know how far we're going to get into with the duck hunting in Australia topic, but I tried to figure out what it took, Michael, to be a hunter in Australia. I was trying to figure out hunter education requirements, all that, and one thing that kept coming up is you have to have a special permit to own a firearm.
Yep, that sounds about right. Down there, their views on firearms down there are so much different than our views here. Especially in the Midwest, in Nebraska, pretty conservative when it comes to firearms and things like that. And down there, they're just it's very tightly restricted. So it kind of right off the bat, your access. We talk about access a lot. Right off the bat there, your opportunity access to even hunt is very limited based on their certain rules and regulations.
Exactly, and we'll get into that just a little bit as far as land and property as well. And so oftentimes what I found online anyways, when you start trying to find out what it takes to become a hunter, the first thing they talk about is a firearm permit.
Yep.
And you've got to be 18 and older for the most part. There are some exceptions if you're a minor and under supervision of an adult with a special permit. Farmers, landowners dealing with nuisance species, there's some special opportunities there as well for some of their family members, but you got to have that permit. Yep. Even if we were going to go out and you had the guns and you were going to teach me how to hunt in Australia, for me to borrow a firearm, a shotgun, for example, I've got to have a permit that allows me to do that. And for those duck hunters, upland game hunters, or those that deer hunt with a semi-automatic, that's a special license.
Yep.
That one's hardly ever issued other than to landowners dealing with nuisance species. And so you're not probably using the old Benelli shotgun.
Yeah, because what I was reading in that Outdoor Life article that I read that kind of spurned this conversation on, a lot of those guys use over-unders. So what you might think is your pheasant or quail gun, down there it's an everything.
It's an everything.
Your duck, whatever bird you're hunting down there, probably using an over-under, which it would be interesting to hunt ducks or any kind of waterfowl with an over-under.
Yeah,
you definitely want to make sure you're on the ball because you're not getting very much of a follow-up shot.
And here, when we go to feed that shotgun or rifle, we've got a multitude of options out as far as ammunition is concerned.
Yep.
There they do as well. However, you can't own or be in possession of any of the ammunition that doesn't match your firearms. And underneath that type of permit, the way I understand it.
Interesting.
So there's different classes of permits. Now, when they're asked how many shotguns do you own, well, how many shotguns do you own? See, it's taken a while, folks, right there.
At least 3, and there's a couple spread between myself and my dad right now. So yeah, probably.
So you'd have to have a special permit.
Yeah, more than one.
More than one. There is no official countrywide regulation on how much ammunition or firearms you can have, but the state or country can, the government there can ask you reasons why you have it if they think it's too many, whether it's ammunition or firearms. You've got to have a purpose for what you have there as well. And the interesting thing, and we all talk about in hunter education, we talk about safely storing firearms.
Yep.
And the responsibility goes with that. There, it's mandated.
Yep. I assume probably separate stores between firearm and ammunition.
Different access, yeah.
Both has to be locked up. And
And in some places, they actually mandate how thick the steel is when it comes to the gun safe and all that. And it's not if you're going to follow it, it's
you're going to check or else. Yeah.
So a little bit different, and the firearms comes into it. Yeah. Access, you mentioned that on private land. A little bit more open than some of the public lands that they have. And it's state by state, just like we are here in the United States, state by state, different regulations, different areas, different properties. Some states you can only hunt on private land, and on certain species. In other states, private land, there is some public lands as well, or crown grounds, or I don't remember exactly how they say it.
I like that.
But and some of those are very specific in what you can hunt and what you can't. Some you need a special hunt permit for different types of game birds and things, but most of the invasives are kind of, like you said, free game. But you mentioned crown ground, and that is a funny word to us. Back when we spilled all the tea and it led to a big fight. We kind of changed that.
We won that fight.
Canada, they have, and that's where I get that term, crown grounds, because still a Commonwealth.
Still a Commonwealth of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and so similar their model. We were talking about in the morning conversation in the hallway about, Australia started out as a penal colony, right?
Yep, it did.
For Great Britain. And they kind of brought in that whole idea that the wildlife and the land, owned by, only certain people.
Owned by the crown and enjoyed by the nobles.
And therefore anything on that land, including the wildlife, owned by that landowner.
Yep.
Here in the United States, not the same case. Those wildlife are owned by the people of that state, or in the case of birds and critters that cross international as well as state lines, like ducks, geese, great example, doves, kind of seen as a national resource as well.
Federally regulated.
So we all own it, and yet no one individual does. So, but Australia, definitely the individual. So that kind of sets the frame. Again, if we got any Australians out there that do hunt or know a little bit more about that background, love to hear from you. And
please feel free to correct us.
Yeah, exactly, down below, because it's different. It's just a different way of thinking.
It is.
If I remember right, looking at Wikipedia numbers, and Wikipedia never lies.
Never.
Not on purpose. Only about 2.5% of the entire population of Australia hunts.
And see, the Outdoor Life article I read, actually, they quoted in there, it's even less than that duck hunt. Like 0.1% of Australians duck hunt.
Woo!
Which is wild.
Yeah,
that's barely anybody.
So it's something that wasn't available to a lot of folks, and still isn't. So that kind of mindset on how it goes and transpires. It's always interesting when you ask someone that's involved in a pursuit. Doesn't matter what sport or activity it is. Different views, those that take part in it, compared to those that don't. Golf courses, great example. If you golf and you love to golf, you've got one view of them. If you don't golf, you might have a different view.
Yeah, and that definitely plays out down there. There's been a lot of political pushback on duck hunting down there too in certain parts of the country. I think it's kind of like we have here. Some parts of our country have more pushback on hunting more recently than others, and so it's the same way down there, but maybe a little more exaggerated. But all right. It just depends on where you're at.
So let's jump into this, because, folks, I haven't read this article. I meant to before we sat down here in the cabin, but job got in the way.
Yeah,
the job did for some reason today.
We do other things here besides talk. So.
I know, that's hard to believe.
And it is sometimes, but yeah, no. That basically, and what caught my attention of this article was that I'll give the title to it real quick. During Australia's duck season, circus is in quotes. Anti-hunting activists will steal your birds, paddle through your decoys, and film your kids, was the title of this article. So I thought, I've got to read this. And the main gist of it is that, duck hunting in Australia is very controversial. There's a lot of the sort of anti-hunting animal rights folks down there who, want it to be banned. And basically, depending on the state or province, I'm not sure what they refer to them down there in Australia, whether they're states or provinces. Basically, some have much looser restrictions on what we would call up here as hunter harassment. There's some states down there that give much more leeway to the activist. They can let them, they're allowed to basically protest. They call it their right to protest. They let them get within, it was using meters here, so they said 10 meters, so 30 feet. Get them within 30 feet of your setup while you're out there sitting in the duck boat, You can paddle through. If you shoot a duck and it's wounded and they go and pick it up, they can take it. They have little duck treatment centers that these activists, they take it to, and they're allowed to try to revive the duck. And this was in one particular, I think it was the province of maybe Victoria.
Okay.
Is what it was. And then, so the author goes over to New South Wales or Southern Australia. I think it may have been New South Wales was the name of the province. I'm not sure. Again, my Australian geography is not great. I know Sydney and Melbourne are on the east side of the continent and Perth is on the west. And that's about what I know. But go over there and it's much, much less restrictive. They have to stay out of the water. They can't disrupt you while you're hunting. But over in, Victoria, the other province, they can make all sorts of racket, disrupt your hunt, take your ducks if you can't get to your ducks in time. And they also, one thing I thought was interesting is it doesn't matter what sunrise is, shooting hours is 8:00. And so they can see where you're at because sun comes up well before then.
Yeah.
And basically they can just set up and wait. And then as soon as you're starting to work birds coming in, they just kind of come paddling through your setup and birds flare off. And it's a very, very interesting. What I took away from it was that the level of support that we enjoy in this country for hunting, even from people who don't hunt. We recently attended the R3 symposium in Mobile, Alabama, and saw that data on people who support legal hunting and shooting. And it's still 3/4 of Americans support either moderately or strongly support legal hunting or shooting. You think we'd never really see something like that here, but yet down there it's common for certain provinces. In some provinces, I think down in Australia, there's only like 3 or 4 states or provinces that haven't banned duck hunting already. And the majority of them, it's already banned. So it's something, it was interesting that it caught my eye that there's some guys and gals down there still holding on real tight to their duck hunting. But then you go to one province and it's like not being bothered at all. And then others, they just, the hunter harassment laws are much more relaxed.
And you mentioned the symposium. I mean, part of that recruitment and retention of those duck hunters that we have, right? Yep. As well as recreational shooters, anglers, hunting of all types, actually. But how hard is it you really have to be wanting to do it to put up with that level of harassment from an outside party, because you already know, all right, if I choose to go down this path, this is what awaits me, and either that or I can just sleep in on Saturday morning and not have to worry about it. I mean, it sounds, and I'm sure different areas, different spots, different actual things going on.
Yep.
The most aggressive or the most noteworthy is going to get the most news and headlines. But at the same token, just think, hey, I got to deal with that if I decide to go down that route. It's pretty easy to say, I'm not going to mess with that.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're seeing too from the article. It kind of suggested that
10 meters isn't that far. I mean, you think about it, it would be really easy. I'm trying to think of my waterfowl hunting, goose hunting, duck hunting, anything within 30 meters. I'm already thinking whether they're hunters or not already, or another group of hunters on public ground, or someone that's trying to actively scare away birds. Yeah, easy to do.
Yeah, very easy to do. And basically, that's kind of what the article was alluding to, is that for a lot of those hunters, they just have to grin and bear it, because they really can't, it's a public perception battle where, if they act out of line, start yelling, screaming at them, well, then that gives hunters a bad look versus, and then they lose more of that public support. So it was very, very interesting article to read, and just how, when we think of it seems to me the average Australian waterfowler is very similar to the average American waterfowler, is that it's just a regular old Joe Q public going out for a morning of shooting some ducks and getting some tasty stuff to eat and enjoying some time with family and friends. But the climate down there is much more different than the climate up here. And it's a look at why that support for hunting is so important. And not just creating hunters, but creating people who support hunting too.
Yeah, and that is huge, because this is where we talk about losing voice here in the United States. Even in a state like Nebraska, there's all sorts of different interests and opportunities and all that, which is really cool here in the U.S. However, we're we're not as few and far between perhaps as they are down in Australia when it comes to hunters and finding somebody. And sometimes it feels like I know hunters, and folks listening to this, like, well, most people I know hunt, or a good chunk of them. But we're, even as a whole group, all the species, types of hunters here in the state of Nebraska, we make up, 8% of the population? Yeah. And we really don't have a great idea. The support is high, but we don't really have a great grasp on of the millions that live here in the state of Nebraska, how many know a hunter by name, or know this person hunts, or these people hunt, what that connection is necessarily. But it just goes to show you that if things were to start changing and you start losing some of that support, how it can go in that direction.
What it could look like.
Things are a little bit different, but you don't have to look too far outside our own borders to find some restrictions being put in place.
Yep.
You know, we've lost hunting in some states here in the United States for certain species. You know, some places you can't trap. There's certain restrictions on how hunters operate and things like that. Some of them obviously make biological sense and perhaps protection of the resource, but other times it's more just social norms and what one group wants that happens to be able to outvote folks on the other
public
side.
Support.
That's the way it's set up. And so it is kind of interesting to see what transpires. And I got to assume, just going back to some of the basics of that firearm question too, is, you know, obviously I don't believe there's any handgun hunting at all in Australia. In fact, I'm not sure a private citizen can own a handgun.
I don't know. I would assume not.
I did look into it, folks, and there are some states there in Australia that don't allow bow hunting, archery hunting at all.
Wow.
Either. And you know, once you have something that says don't do it, the tradition starts to disappear. And once it's gone, you know, what do you
I would think that archery hunting would be one of the
more acceptable,
yeah.
Maybe, yeah. And we think about that here in the U.S., but it is one of those things. And we know, folks, we've got some great friends that are definitely archery first, and if they do use something else,
if you can't shoot it with a bow and arrow, then well,
probably not going to happen. Yeah, yeah. And so that really kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit, but that's from our perspective.
Yeah. That's as well. A lot different perspective.
And at what point, you know, when I was first teaching hunter ed, we talked about, you know, hunters making up close to 10% of the population, you know, as a whole. And then it went to 9%, and now we're around 8%.
8 or so.
As our hunter numbers go down a little bit, our population, even within a state like Nebraska, continues to grow. And we become a lesser and lesser percentage of it. And it's kind of be interesting to watch to see if that, and that's been the rate, you know, every year a little bit fewer percentage wise hunt, even in Nebraska. You know, where is that point where all of a sudden it's just like, you know,
where does the support start to fade? Yeah,
like you said, we're still at about 3 out of 4 people support legalized managed type hunting. But also, is there a point we saw, you know, numbers that it's gone down a point or two the last 2 or 3 years.
Went down almost 5% there from 2018 to 2021 to 2023, and then this last year basically went down another percentage point, which in the grand scheme of things, in a country that's, you know, however many million strong, is not a statistically significant difference, but 5% definitely is.
It's creep.
So it is just kind of creeping up there, and that's a big reason why we do what we do.
Yeah,
you know, with the R3 effort and hunter ed and all those sorts of things.
One of the things we're really proud of here in Nebraska, and we partnered with South Dakota within the Central Flyway, is our Tier 2 options, a different harvest option for duck hunters here in the 2 states. We've got an experimental 4-season harvest strategy going on, and we've been, you know, 3 years so far. We got 1 more year at least to go in this experiment with the 2 states, where you can select going through the current traditional regulations, which is the liberal 6 ducks per day, and then there's some species restrictions. There's some sex restrictions. For example, mallards, you can only, of those 6 ducks, only 5 can be mallards, and only 2 of those 5 can be hen mallards, that type of thing. Or because we realize that complex regulations and in duck the duck world, identification is kind of a tripping point for current hunters, those that might be new hunters. So we have the second tier option that allows just 3 ducks to be harvested per day with no restrictions on species, no restrictions on gender. They just have to be 3. And it's been pretty popular.
Yeah. Looking through this waterfowl guide, there's a lot of different ducks that you can encounter in the state of Nebraska.
Yeah, we sat around the cooler one time several years ago and came up with 16 different species of ducks. And each one has kind of a little bit different. There's some that you can lump all together, the teal species, gadwalls, widgeon, all 6 of them can be those without respect to gender or sex. But that said, that's helped some new hunters into the field. It's helped get some of our lapsed duck hunters in the field, because the second most common group that makes use of that 2-tier, that second tier option, the new harvest strategy, are those that have hunted ducks before, but they hadn't hunted ducks in the last 5, 6, 7 seasons. So they came back to the sport because of it, and saying, hey, I had that problem, now I want back in, and this is the way to do it. In a place like Australia, that's not going to happen.
No.
That's not going to happen.
Which I will say this, at the end of the story, they were talking about the new province, the one next door they went to, and their bag limit was 10 ducks. I was like, man, that'd be nice sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes one is good.
There's days where you're just like, oh man, I got 2 ducks. That's pretty good for today. And there's other days where you get your limit pretty quick. It's like, I wish I could get a few more ducks. But just go to show you the differences and structure, seasons, all sorts of different things. But that tier 2 is definitely, it's been, I think whenever we originally set out, it was more of a recruitment minded tool.
It was
like you were getting at, and it's turned out to be a really good reactivation tool. It
has been. And that was kind of interesting, folks, because early on, we thought, if we had 500 people choose that tier 2, that second tier, the new harvest strategy, if we thought 500 here in the state of Nebraska, we were doing well. Because people hadn't heard about it, how many were actually going to impact, but we started getting calls about it pretty fast, especially from those folks you were talking about that were getting back into it. Just like, that's great. My eyes aren't what they used to be. It's always been a concern because, hey, if you go bowling, for example, and you step across that line, it buzzes at you.
Yep.
That's it. But if you make a mistake out in the field ball duck hunting, that's a citation. That might be a federal fine on top of that as well. And
real quick, you go to bowling ranges that buzz at you when you step over the line?
Every once in a while. I mean,
that I need to visit those. That's a fancy bowling range.
Yeah, it's fun. That doesn't count, Aaron. No, Hershey, you're out.
If only you had that in the field. But
I don't get the option of even throwing a gut ball. It just gives me a 0. But anyway,
that's true.
We figured out pretty quick that this might be a little different than just a brand new hunter recruitment tool. Yeah. And that first year, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it was close to 3,000.
I think it's
hunters
been around,
registered for it rather than the 500 we thought.
It's been right around 3,000, I think, every year. At least the data that I've seen, usually in that 3,000, 3,200 range. Haven't seen the data for this past waterfowl season yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's even a little bit higher. Than that. And
I know there's some concern, and I know there might be some thinking, why do they do? Why don't you think that IDing ducks is important? We do. Yep. We do. We think that's part of the fun of duck hunting is all the variety out there. However, like I said, it's one of those things the conservation officer get to ID it while in hand.
Yep, and you're trying to ID
it, when it's going 30 miles an hour and buzzes you. Not to say, hey, if you can't identify it properly, hey, don't take the shot. But they've got to identify it as a duck.
Yep.
And there's a lot more birds out there, and that's kind of the first step in the process as well. Plus, if the resource, in this case ducks, can handle that harvest, and we haven't shown any significant impacts to those that we're most concerned about, pintails being one, lesser scaup being another, then, why not provide an opportunity? I'm going to shoot fewer birds in a bag limit, but I'm willing to have more opportunity for any duck that comes by. Also, we've found out that we've got some very religious duck hunters, and I'm sure there's some listening that are out there, any opportunity they can get during the waterfowl season to chase ducks or geese, and some of them are out there, most of the season.
Yep.
These folks taking advantage of tier 2, we're talking maybe 5 days. the entire season. And we're, like I said, we're at the maximum allowable hunting days for ducks, as well as geese in this state. And we're talking 5 ducks or less that these individuals are harvesting. So it's not a big number.
They're not your diehard every day out there waterfowlers. They're your more casual hunters that are either trying to get into the sport, or maybe they've been in it and gotten out of it, and then they want to jump back in because they just want to go out and have some fun again with their buddies or their kids or whoever, or their grandkids, and they're just wanting to go out there and shoot a few ducks and call it a day.
And what's kind of cool is they're harvesting ducks, the kind of ducks we run into the most.
Yeah,
teal, mallards. In some places, wood ducks, that type of thing. So it's not like they're running into the super rare often.
We're not running into a 30 flock of pintails and taking them out.
I just kind of think about that. Boy, we're trying to help our waterfowl actually by selling more permits, more duck stamps, more federal migratory duck stamps, that type of stuff. That means more habitat, more conservation on the ground, which means more ducks. And over in Australia, they're trying to, in some places, sounds like close down duck hunting, period.
Take it away.
Now, their system might be different where who knows how those lands are paid for. Here,
that's true.
Our excise taxes on ammunition, on archery equipment, on that new firearm you bought, as well as those permit dollars goes back into conservation. But again, it's a resource that belongs to all of us.
Yep, that's the tenet,
not so much.
The tenet of the North American model. But wildlife belongs to all of us, and our those excise dollars that we all pay into with licenses and manufacturers pay into, it all goes back to help support conservation.
There you go. Now, I was telling you this, and I'm going to tell our listeners out there that my first exposure to Australian hunting, and I haven't been there yet. It would be a neat country, I think, to visit.
It'd be cool.
But we had a gentleman at a conference, at a coordinators conference years ago that came from Australia. Mm-hmm. He was a coordinator for this program there. And somehow the conversation turned to hunting, and of all things, rabbits. Now, we might have some rabbit hunters listening. We probably have some folks that have rabbit hunted in the past. And, we think of cottontail rabbits. Some folks might have chased some jackrabbits, that type of thing. Or if we got some up there in the North Woods, maybe even some snowshoe hare type thing. But, something we cut our teeth on. And, man, you talk about tasty and all that stuff. Highly coveted in some places. We got people that have beagles for them, that chase them. We have others that stalk them and all that. We've got a pretty liberal season, to say the least, in bag. But also it's one of our managed species. Well, they were introduced, and we've all seen it, and you don't have to go too far online to see that they introduced species. Mm-hmm. A nuisance species there in Australia that has really taken over in some spots. And I know when they first introduced, all of a sudden, boom, no predators were taking advantage of it at that time. I assume that's changed. And they were, having, big die-offs after these explosions of rabbit populations. Well, the Australian coordinator was talking about rabbit hunting in his home country. And he said that he did not like taking a yank. That's what he called us. Didn't matter what line, where you were in relation to the Mason-Dixon line, you Yanks, rabbit hunting.
I can imagine that might offend a
And we're like, why? Because he was talking about seeing hundreds of them at times, hundreds of them. Going on a rabbit hunt, and your barrel just getting hot, just so hot you couldn't hardly touch it anymore. It's like, wow, that sounds like a fun rabbit hunt. He said, well, yeah, the problem is I give you Yanks the spotlight, and I'm on the gun, and all of a sudden you're just entranced by how many hundreds of rabbits there are, and you're moving that spotlight all over the place, and I can't stop and aim in the middle of the night. So it was different. It's trying to kill as many rabbits as they could.
Spotlight.
So they go out at night, catch them around water holes or what have you, spotlighting them, and they're not moving. And the rest of us, all of us Americans, we had some good Southern boys too.
Hear the word spotlight.
Spotlight and rabbits. How can you do that? It's just like, well, different world, different country, different situation. If you're an angler listening, largemouth bass, we've got $1 million tournaments plus going on, and in certain parts of Europe, they're frowned upon.
Yanking them out.
They're
right
the
out,
green carp over there to them. So just kind of interesting, but it also opened my eyes to what's going on there. They do have quite a diversity of game.
Yeah.
A lot of them are introduced that they hunt. There's a few natives, but they're really protective on that and just a different world. So I think we're going to put a fork right in there. Nice short one. Again,
nice,
folks, if we have an Australian listening, we'd love to hear your ideas, thoughts, experiences there, and we'll maybe look at some other countries and regions and see what it's like to become a hunter.
Share a story with us on what
hunting's
like in your country if you're from outside the U.S.
There you go. But we're going to put a bow on it right now, and make sure you give us a big thumbs up or a like so we know when each and every one of these new episode is made available. But until next time, we'll see you outdoors. Hunt Nebraska, brought to you by your Nebraska Game and Parks Commission.